In the late summer of 1939, Europe was a continent teetering on the edge of chaos. The shadow of Germany stretched across the map, and Britain, a small island nation, watched with growing apprehension as Hitler's ambitions grew ever more bold. Across the Channel, armies were mobilizing, airfields expanding, and factories hummered with the rhythmic pounding of machines preparing for war. Though many citizens went about their daily lives, there was a sense of unease, an invisible tension that clung to the streets of London, the docks of Southampton, and the countryside of southern England. For Britain, the coming conflict was not merely a question of armies marching on land or navies clashing at sea. The future of the nation depended upon the mastery of the sky. Air superiority would become the decisive factor, the line between survival and defeat. The Royal Air Force, still a relatively young institution, was preparing to become the nation's shield against an enemy whose ambitions were unmatched in scale and brutality. And at the center of that defense would be a remarkable aircraft, one destined to enter legend, the supermarine Spitfire. The Spitfire was the product of vision, ingenuity, and the urgent demand of a nation racing against time. Its designer, Reginald Joseph Mitchell, had spent years perfecting a fighter that could outmaneuver, outclimb, and outrun anything the world had seen. The aircraft's sleek, elliptical wings were more than aesthetic elegance. They were a triumph of aerodynamics, giving the Spitfire its legendary agility. Its heart, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, was a marvel of engineering, capable of propelling the fighter to speeds and altitudes that made even the formidable German Messerschmitt Bf 109 pause in caution. Across the sprawling airfields of southern England, the first Spitfires rolled down runways, their polished fuselages gleaming in the morning sun. Mechanics tightened bolts and checked instruments, their hands steady, but hearts pounding. These men, often young and untested, were acutely aware of what they were maintaining. Not just a machine, but the fragile lifeline of a nation. Every adjustment, every oiling of a wing joint, every inspection of the landing gear mattered. The margin for error was razor thin, the cost of failure catastrophic. Alongside the Spitfires, Hawker Hurricanes filled the skies. While the Spitfire would become iconic for its speed and maneuverability, the Hurricane was the workhorse of the RAF, a sturdy, reliable fighter capable of withstanding punishment and delivering precise firepower. Together, these aircraft formed the backbone of Britain's aerial defense, complementary forces designed to repel an enemy that was already testing the limits of its own air capabilities. The pilots who would fly these machines were a diverse group, drawn from across the British Isles and beyond. Young men barely out of school, veterans of the First World War's shadow still lingering, and volunteers from the far reaches of the British Empire joined the squadrons. Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, Poles, Czechs, and even Americans who had chosen to fight before their country entered the war all became part of the RAF's growing network. They shared one understanding: the sky would be their battlefield, and failure was not an option. Training these pilots was an exacting and sometimes unforgiving process. They learned to navigate by sight and by instruments, to execute maneuvers at high speed, to read the behavior of both enemy and machine in fractions of a second. Flight instructors drilled them relentlessly in emergency procedures, gunnery, formation flying, and evasive action. Many trainees would discover that the skills required to survive were as much mental as physical. The ability to remain calm under fire, to think and act instinctively, would separate the survivors from those who would never see another sortie. While Britain prepared, Germany's Luftwaffe was rapidly expanding its influence across the continent. With bases in occupied France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, German bombers and fighters posed an imminent threat to the southern coast of England. The Reich had learned from earlier conflicts that control of the air was essential to the success of any campaign. The Luftwaffe's doctrine emphasized concentrated formations, rapid response, and the destructive power of aerial bombardment. For Britain, even a single raid could have devastating effects on morale, infrastructure, and supply lines. In response, the RAF developed a network of radar stations along the coast, known as Chain Home. Towering steel structures bristling with antennas, these early warning systems could detect incoming aircraft at ranges far beyond human sight. Operators, many of them women, watched the flickering screens, coordinating with plotting rooms and airfields to guide fighters to intercept the enemy before it could reach the heart of England. The combination of radar and a fast response fighter force represented a revolutionary approach to air defense, one that would prove decisive in the months to come. Amid these preparations, the tension was palpable. Civilians noticed the growing presence of aircraft overhead, the thrum of engines from nearby airfields, and the occasional roar of a Spitfire climbing toward the clouds. Posters adorned public spaces, urging enlistment, vigilance, and support for the war effort. Newspapers carried headlines that reflected both urgency and defiance. Britain would not yield, but the cost of resistance would be measured in courage, skill, and sacrifice. As the first Spitfires left the hangars for training sorties, pilots began to feel the unique bond between man and machine. The aircraft demanded respect and understanding. Each dive, climb, or turn had to be precise. Each decision could determine life or death. Young pilots quickly discovered that the Spitfire, though responsive and powerful, required attentiveness and finesse. Mishandling its speed or overestimating its capabilities could lead to disaster even without the presence of an enemy. Yet for those who mastered it, the aircraft offered unparalleled confidence, a partner in the sky capable of extraordinary feats. The months leading up to the outbreak of hostilities were a time of nervous anticipation. Intelligence reports, aerial reconnaissance, and diplomatic signals suggested that the Germans were preparing for invasion. Exercises were conducted relentlessly, airfields were reinforced, and the crews practiced scrambling under timed conditions, often racing across wet grass to reach their aircraft before the warning sirens faded. Each drill brought home the reality. War would not wait for perfect conditions, nor would it forgive hesitation. By the fall of 1939, Britain had laid the groundwork for what would become the Battle of Britain. The Spitfires and Hurricanes were ready, the pilots trained, and the radar network operational. Yet despite these preparations, no one could predict the exact nature of the battles to come. The enemy was experienced, motivated, and ruthless. Every sortie, every engagement would test the limits of both human and machine. And so, with Europe in turmoil and the Channel waters restless beneath the early winter winds, the stage was set. On the horizon, the roar of engines, the flash of sunlight on polished wings, and the distant promise of combat heralded the beginning of a conflict that would define a generation. The skies over Britain, calm and blue for now, were about to become the proving ground where courage, skill, and ingenuity would determine the fate of a nation. It was here, amid the airfields, radar towers, and the early squadrons of young men learning their trade, that the legend of the Spitfire and of the pilots who would become known as the Few began. And it was from this moment, this gathering storm, that the courage of Britain would emerge, ready to meet the greatest threat the island had ever faced. By the summer of 1940, the tension that had simmered across Britain finally erupted into action. The Luftwaffe, confident in its strength and experience, launched the first concentrated attacks on the southern coast of England. For the young RAF pilots, these were the first true tests of everything they had learned, the first moments when the blue sky above became a crucible of fire, smoke, and steel. The Channel had long been a natural barrier, a line of separation between Britain and the forces amassing in northern France. Yet now, it became a stage for the opening acts of one of history's most dramatic air battles. On early sorties, the Spitfires and Hurricanes encountered enemy reconnaissance aircraft, soon followed by formations of German bombers escorted by Bf-109 fighters. These first engagements were chaotic, deadly, and instructive. Pilots quickly realized that theoretical training and drills could not fully prepare them for the unpredictability of combat. The young men of Fighter Command faced a formidable challenge. Outnumbered, often inexperienced, and flying at the very edge of their endurance, they were tasked with intercepting highly trained Luftwaffe crews. The odds seemed almost insurmountable, yet the Spitfire, with its unmatched agility, allowed pilots to maneuver in ways that could surprise even seasoned German pilots. Sharp climbs, tight turns, and sudden dives became the tools of survival. It was a dance of death, each movement calculated to gain the slightest advantage. Dogfights over the Channel were swift and brutal. Pilots described them as a blur of wings and tracers, where seconds could decide life or death. One moment a Spitfire would be climbing through clouds, the next it would be diving in pursuit of a Bf-109, guns spitting fire, the sound of explosions echoing across the sky. The sea below reflected the sunlight in dazzling patterns, but it also became a graveyard for those who did not return. Parachutes blossomed in the air as planes were struck, their pilots either rescued by the Navy or lost to the cold waters of the Channel. Amid the chaos, teamwork and tactics became crucial. Fighter Command's use of radar and control rooms allowed squadrons to intercept enemy formations with surprising efficiency. Pilots were guided to their targets by ground controllers who tracked incoming raids, coordinated multiple squadrons, and adapted plans in real time. Still, the moment the pilot broke from formation to engage the enemy, he was alone in a lethal ballet, relying on instinct, training, and the capabilities of his aircraft. The early days of the battle exposed the vulnerabilities of both sides. The Luftwaffe was initially confident. Its pilots trained in aggressive, formation-based tactics. Yet the German pilots soon discovered that the Spitfire's responsiveness could counter their standard maneuvers. While the Bf-109 could dive faster in a straight line, the Spitfire could outturn it in close combat, forcing German pilots to adapt quickly or risk disaster. Hurricanes, though less nimble, proved effective against bomber formations, their heavier armament allowing them to shred enemy aircraft before they could reach inland targets. Pilots learned harsh lessons with every sortie. The skies became a classroom of life and death, where mistakes were costly and experience was earned in blood and sweat. Young pilots recalled the terror of chasing an enemy over the channel, the brief exhilaration of a successful attack, and the profound relief of returning to base with their aircraft intact. Even the most confident veterans felt the strain. The constant alertness, adrenaline, and fatigue took their toll on mind and body. Mechanics and ground crews were equally vital in this maelstrom. After each sortie, aircraft returned battered and smoking. Panels were torn, control surfaces damaged, and engines stressed to their limits. Mechanics worked tirelessly, often through the night, repairing, replacing, and adjusting, sometimes with makeshift solutions. They were the invisible guardians of the RAF's strength, ensuring that as many planes as possible returned to the sky for the next mission. Without them, even the bravest pilots could not have maintained the pace required to defend Britain. As the weeks progressed, engagements became more intense. The Luftwaffe increased the size of its raids, testing the limits of Britain's defenses. German bombers struck at ports, radar stations, and airfields, while their escorts sought to clear the skies of RAF fighters. Each day brought new lessons, new strategies, and new casualties. Pilots learned to coordinate attacks, cover each other, and anticipate the enemy's moves. The concept of teamwork in the air evolved rapidly, forged under extreme pressure. The human element of these battles cannot be overstated. Pilots endured hours in cramped cockpits, exposed to freezing winds at altitude, with only oxygen masks and layered flight gear for protection. They faced the constant psychological stress of knowing that one miscalculation could mean death, that comrades might fall within moments of takeoff. Letters home, when they were written, often downplayed the danger, reflecting the stoicism expected of men who knew the stakes were national survival. Civilians began to see the toll in new ways. From the cliffs of Dover to the coastal towns, they witnessed flashes of dogfights, heard the staccato bursts of machine guns, and occasionally watched as a Spitfire or Hurricane returned, smoking or wingless, guided by skill and luck alone. The war was no longer an abstract threat. It was immediate, visible, and terrifying. Yet despite this, morale remained resilient. The people understood that the pilots above were not only fighting for the skies, but for the very continuation of their way of life. By mid-August, the intensity of the air battles increased sharply. Historians later referred to this period as the first major wave of sustained Luftwaffe attacks over Britain. Pilots were flying multiple sorties per day, sometimes returning to base only briefly to refuel and rearm. Fatigue was constant, but so was determination. Each successful interception, each bomber sent down in flames, was proof that the RAF could hold the line against overwhelming numbers. The interplay of technology, strategy, and human courage defined this period. Radar allowed controllers to deploy squadrons efficiently, but it was the pilot's skill that determined the outcome once they engaged the enemy. The aircraft, both Spitfire and Hurricane, were more than machines. They were extensions of the pilot's will, capable of extraordinary feats when mastered. And the pilots, drawn from Britain and across the Commonwealth, became symbols of resilience, courage, and the stakes of freedom itself. In the sky above southern England, the first real test of Fighter Command's capabilities had begun. It was a trial by fire, a baptism of courage, and an introduction to a new kind of warfare where control of the air could determine the fate of a nation. The Channel, once a peaceful separation, became a battlefield, and every cloud, every gust of wind, and every sunbeam could conceal danger. Amid the smoke, tracer fire, and the roar of engines, the young men in their Spitfires were learning that courage alone was not enough. Success required precision, intelligence, and the unwavering trust in the aircraft beneath them. They were discovering, often painfully, that the maelstrom of the skies demanded everything they had, and yet they also found exhilaration, purpose, and a profound sense of duty that would carry them through the months ahead. By the end of these early engagements, a pattern had emerged. The Spitfire and Hurricane squadrons were not invincible, but they were formidable. They were capable of matching, and in many cases outmaneuvering the enemy. Fighter Command had proven that even in the face of superior numbers, skill, technology, and courage could tip the scales. And as Britain watched from below, the pilots above were already beginning to earn their place in history. The skies had become a crucible, testing every man, every machine, and every strategy. And from this crucible, the legends of the RAF, the Spitfire, and the Few would begin to emerge. Young men who would not only defend their nation, but shape the course of history itself. By the late summer of 1940, the battle over Britain had intensified. What began as sporadic skirmishes along the Channel escalated into a relentless storm of attacks that would test the limits of both men and machines. The Luftwaffe, confident in its strategy and superior numbers, launched waves of bombers aimed not just at ports and airfields, but at the very heart of the nation. For Fighter Command, this was no longer a series of isolated encounters. It was a sustained test of endurance, courage, and tactical ingenuity. The German strategy focused on crippling Britain's ability to defend itself. Airfields, radar stations, and aircraft production facilities were prime targets. Each raid that successfully struck these objectives could delay or even destroy the RAF's capacity to respond. The young pilots, many of them still in their first months of combat, faced a daunting reality. The enemy would come at them relentlessly, day after day, with little mercy and no pause for rest. RAF squadrons were operating at a fraction of their intended strength. Spitfires and Hurricanes were damaged or destroyed in combat, and replacement aircraft struggled to arrive in time. Pilots flew multiple sorties each day, often with only minutes to rest and refuel between missions. Exhaustion set in quickly, affecting both mental focus and physical reflexes. Yet despite fatigue, fear, and mounting losses, the pilots displayed extraordinary resilience, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. The first waves of the intensified campaign saw massive bomber formations escorted by swarms of Bf-109s. The Luftwaffe aimed to overwhelm the RAF through sheer force, hoping that relentless attacks would break both the machines and the morale of the men who flew them. The skies over southern England became a complex battlefield, with hundreds of aircraft maneuvering in tight formations, engines roaring, guns blazing. The aerial dogfights were brutal, chaotic, and unforgiving. Pilots quickly adapted to the harsh realities of combat. Tactics evolved in real time, with lessons learned at the cost of lives. One successful maneuver might mean the difference between downing an enemy bomber or being shot out of the sky. Group formations, coordinated attacks, and cover tactics became essential. The combination of Spitfire's agility and Hurricane's firepower allowed the RAF to respond with flexibility. The Spitfires engaged enemy fighters to clear the way, while Hurricanes focused on intercepting and destroying bombers. Ground crews were the unsung heroes of this period. Every return from combat brought aircraft damaged by gunfire, flak, or structural strain. Mechanics worked tirelessly to repair wings, engines, and control surfaces, often improvising when parts were scarce or damaged. Their dedication meant that even battered aircraft could be returned to service in a matter of hours. Without these efforts, the pilots' heroism would have been wasted. The battle was as much a test of the ground crew's endurance as it was of the men in the cockpits. The psychological strain on pilots was immense. Each sortie carried the weight of responsibility for their comrades, their aircraft, and the people they defended on the ground. Casualties were constant reminders of the stakes. Young men who had trained for months suddenly confronted death at high speeds, hundreds of feet above the ground, often in unpredictable weather. The sound of tracer fire, the flash of exploding aircraft, and the sight of parachutes descending over the sea became daily realities. Despite the intensity, fighter command's coordination remained a decisive advantage. Radar stations along the coast, part of the chain home system, provided early warning of incoming raids, giving controllers time to scramble squadrons and guide them to interception points. Communication between ground control and pilots was critical, allowing for real-time adjustments and coordinated attacks. Even as the Luftwaffe sought to exploit gaps and weaknesses, the RAF's integrated system often turned potential disaster into opportunity. The Luftwaffe's attacks in this period revealed both their strengths and limitations. German pilots were highly trained and disciplined, their bombers heavily armed and coordinated. Yet the scale of the attacks, combined with the ingenuity and resilience of the RAF, began to expose vulnerabilities. Overextended formations, fuel limitations, and mechanical failures reduced the effectiveness of some raids. The Spitfire's superior maneuverability often allowed British pilots to gain positional advantage, turning numerical inferiority into tactical opportunity. The summer of 1940 became a crucible of endurance. Each day, RAF pilots faced new challenges, intercepting waves of bombers, engaging enemy fighters, navigating through smoke and anti-aircraft fire, and returning to base for repairs and resupply. Every sortie tested reflexes, judgment, and courage. Those who survived the gauntlet developed an instinctive understanding of aerial combat that textbooks could never provide. The lessons learned under fire forged a generation of pilots whose skill and bravery would later become legendary. As the Luftwaffe intensified its campaign, the stakes grew higher. Radar stations and airfields were targeted for destruction, aiming to weaken the RAF's capacity to respond. Hurricanes and Spitfires were lost in large numbers, sometimes in a single engagement. Yet each defensive success, each bomber sent down in flames, served as a testament to the pilots' determination and the effectiveness of British tactics. Even when facing overwhelming odds, the young airmen of Fighter Command held their ground. Civilian populations, meanwhile, began to feel the impact of these attacks more directly. Coastal towns, industrial centers, and infrastructure were under threat, and the constant drone of engines overhead was both a warning and a symbol of danger. Yet the British public adapted to these new realities. civilians supported the war effort through vigilance, civil defense, and moral encouragement for the pilots risking their lives above. The bond between those on the ground and those in the air became a crucial element of Britain's endurance. By August, the RAF had established itself as a formidable opponent. Losses were heavy, but the combination of technological advantage, strategic use of radar, rigorous training, and sheer bravery allowed fighter commands to respond effectively. Pilots learned not only to survive, but to dominate in the skirmishes that defined the opening phase of the Battle of Britain. The Spitfire had proven itself capable in combat, the Hurricane reliable and deadly, and the young airmen increasingly confident in their ability to face a relentless enemy. This period, however, was not without tragedy. Many young pilots paid the ultimate price, falling from the sky in fiery combat or crashing into the channel. Each loss was felt across the squadrons, reinforcing both the gravity of the mission and the camaraderie among those who remained. Letters home, diary entries, and reports reflect a mixture of fear, determination, and quiet heroism, a window into the human cost of defending a nation under siege. The test of fire was, in every sense, a crucible. It demanded everything from the pilots, the aircraft, and the ground crews. Yet it also revealed the extraordinary resilience and skill that would define Britain's defense in the months to come. By facing the Luftwaffe head-on, the RAF was not merely surviving. It was proving that courage, strategy, and innovation could withstand even the most formidable assault. In these early weeks of sustained conflict, the foundations were laid for the legendary stand that would follow. Fighter command's ability to adapt, endure, and triumph against overwhelming odds set the stage for the battles that would define the summer, and ultimately, the fate of Britain itself. The skies over southern England had become a proving ground, and the men who flew in Spitfires and Hurricanes were learning lessons that would echo through history. The test of fire had begun, and Britain's defenders were proving that, in the heart of the storm, they would not yield. As August turned to September 1940, the Luftwaffe shifted its strategy. The initial assaults on airfields and radar stations had not broken Britain's air defenses, and frustration began to show in the German command. Instead of focusing solely on the RAF, they turned their attention to London, hoping that terror and destruction would crush civilian morale and force Britain into submission. What followed would become one of the most dramatic and harrowing phases of the Battle of Britain, the Blitz. London, a sprawling metropolis, was unprepared for the scale and intensity of the attacks. Residents were accustomed to the distant drone of aircraft, but the sudden roar of hundreds of bombers, escorted by fighter aircraft, brought the war uncomfortably close. Sirens wailed across the city, warning of incoming raids, while families scrambled to shelters and subways, clutching whatever they could carry. The streets were thick with smoke and confusion, as people watched the sky, fearing for their lives and the lives of their loved ones. For the RAF pilots, this shift in strategy introduced a new level of complexity and danger. Intercepting bombers over London meant navigating densely populated areas, where mistakes could result in both loss of life on the ground and destruction of critical infrastructure. Yet the pilots knew the stakes. Allowing bombers to reach the heart of the city unchallenged would have devastating consequences. The skies above London became a crucible where experience, courage, and precision were tested like never before. Spitfires and Hurricanes streaked into the air, climbing rapidly to intercept the enemy formations. The dogfights over the city were chaotic, with tracers cutting through clouds of smoke and the thrum of engines reverberating through the urban canyons. Pilots had to adjust their tactics to account for the new environment, balancing aggression with caution. Engaging the enemy too low could endanger civilians. Engaging too high could allow bombers to escape. Every decision required split-second judgment, honed by weeks of relentless combat over the Channel. The Luftwaffe's bombers were formidable. Heinkel He-111s, Dornier Do-17s, and Junkers Ju-88s, flying in precise formations, unleashed tons of explosives on London's docks, factories, and residential areas. Their escorts, the Bf-109 fighters, sought to clear the skies of British defenders, engaging Spitfires in furious maneuvers that would test the limits of both aircraft and pilot. Each raid was a battle of wills, skill, and endurance, a deadly contest where the lives of thousands hung in the balance. Ground-based defenses played a critical role. Anti-aircraft guns, strategically placed across the city, sent flak into the sky, creating walls of bursting shells that forced bomber formations to adjust course. Observers in the control rooms coordinated the movement of squadrons, tracking enemy aircraft and directing pilots to the most critical points of interception. Radar operators, plotting officers, and controllers formed a network of coordination that, while imperfect, proved essential in the defense of the city. The human cost of these raids was staggering. Civilians experienced the fear of firestorms, the destruction of homes and businesses, and the constant threat to life. Yet amidst the terror, resilience shone through. Communities organized air raid precautions. Firefighters battled blazes caused by incendiaries, and volunteers assisted in evacuations. The city's endurance became a reflection of the RAF pilots' determination above. Both stood as symbols of a nation refusing to yield under pressure. For the pilots, the challenge was both physical and psychological. Extended sorties over the city meant limited opportunities for rest, exposure to high-altitude cold, and the constant knowledge that each engagement could be their last. The need for precision was paramount. Misjudging a maneuver could result not only in personal death, but in catastrophic damage below. Yet the Spitfire, with its responsiveness and power, gave pilots a fighting chance. Skilled pilots could weave through enemy formations, outturn pursuing fighters, and position themselves to strike with deadly accuracy. Hurricanes, sturdy and reliable, concentrated on disrupting bomber formations, their heavier armament cutting paths through defensive lines. Amid the whirlwind of fire, smoke, and steel, stories of extraordinary heroism emerged. Pilots who had been flying almost continuously for weeks executed maneuvers that seemed impossible, saving both the city and their fellow airmen. The skies were a theater of improvisation and instinct, where the combination of experience, courage, and trust in one's aircraft often meant the difference between survival and death. Letters and diaries from the period capture a sense of awe and terror, a recognition that ordinary men were performing extraordinary feats above an imperiled city. The Luftwaffe, despite its numerical advantage, began to encounter unexpected resistance. London's dense urban environment made bombing runs more hazardous, and the coordination of multiple squadrons became increasingly difficult under constant attack from Spitfires and Hurricanes. German losses mounted, and the toll on pilots' morale began to show. While the Blitz caused destruction, it did not break Britain's spirit. Every bomber intercepted, every formation scattered, reinforced the determination of both the pilots in the air and the citizens on the ground. By early September, the pattern of the Blitz was clear. Day after day, the Luftwaffe attempted to force Britain into submission through bombing raids on London and other key targets. Fighter Command, though stretched to its limits, adapted and responded with tactical ingenuity. The pilots learned to anticipate enemy strategies, coordinate attacks more effectively, and maximize the strengths of their aircraft. The Spitfire's agility allowed pilots to exploit openings in enemy formations, while Hurricanes provided the necessary firepower to disrupt bombing runs. Civilians, meanwhile, adjusted to life under constant threat. Air raid shelters became a routine part of daily life, and the shared experience of enduring bombardments fostered a sense of collective resilience. Newsreels, newspapers, and radio broadcasts carried stories of courage and sacrifice, highlighting both the bravery of the pilots and the steadfastness of the populace. Together, they formed a psychological and physical defense that complemented the technological and tactical measures in the skies. As September progressed, the Luftwaffe shifted focus again, temporarily easing attacks on airfields to concentrate on civilian targets. This strategic misstep, intended to break morale, inadvertently gave the RAF crucial breathing space. Pilots could regroup, rearm, and refine their tactics, preparing for the pivotal engagements that would soon define the outcome of the Battle of Britain. The whirlwind over London, though devastating, revealed a truth that would resonate throughout the conflict. Courage, coordination, and perseverance could overcome even the most intense assault. The Blitz tested every aspect of Britain's defense. Pilots endured extreme physical and mental strain, aircraft were pushed to their operational limits, and ground crews labored tirelessly to maintain readiness. Yet, through it all, the defenders adapted, innovated, and persisted. The combination of technology, strategy, and human determination forged a resilient shield that would stand against the German onslaught. By the end of this period, it was evident that the battle over London was more than a military engagement. It was a test of national character, a measure of courage in the face of terror, and a demonstration of the extraordinary lengths ordinary people would go to protect their country. The whirlwind over London was a prelude to the decisive encounters that lay ahead, a period that would solidify the legend of the Spitfire, the Hurricanes, and the men who would come to be known as the Few. By mid-September 1940, the Battle of Britain had reached a critical point. For weeks, the Luftwaffe had pounded southern England with relentless raids, shifting their focus from airfields to cities in a desperate bid to break the British spirit. London had endured firestorms, and the RAF had been pushed to its limits. Yet, amid the chaos, a defining moment was approaching, a day that would symbolize courage, resilience, and the extraordinary skill of a small number of pilots who would come to be remembered as the Few. 15 September 1940 would later be immortalized in British history as a turning point. Intelligence had tracked the movement of hundreds of German aircraft, including bombers and their fighter escorts, poised to launch a massive daylight raid. The Luftwaffe aimed to deliver a decisive blow, one that would shatter the RAF's remaining strength and open the way for a potential invasion. The skies were crowded, tense, and electric, every pilot aware that this would be a battle like no other. RAF squadrons scrambled from airfields across southern England, Spitfires and Hurricanes climbing into the clouds in waves of silver and green. Ground controllers, radar operators, and plotting officers worked in unison to direct the pilots toward enemy formations with precision. Every second counted. The Luftwaffe, confident and disciplined, believed that sheer numbers would overwhelm the British defenders. But they had not accounted for the determination and skill of the RAF pilots, nor the capabilities of the aircraft they commanded. The ensuing dogfights were fierce and chaotic. Pilots described the air as a tapestry of tracer fire, smoke trails, and roaring engines. The sky became a three-dimensional chessboard, where positioning, speed, and timing were everything. Spitfires engaged Bf-109 fighters with daring maneuvers, using tight turns, rapid climbs, and sudden dives to gain the upper hand. Hurricanes focused on intercepting bomber formations, firing bursts of concentrated machine gun fire to disable or destroy enemy aircraft. The combination of agility and firepower allowed the RAF to challenge, scatter, and ultimately repel the German attacks. Throughout the day, pilots demonstrated extraordinary courage. Many were young men barely out of training, facing seasoned Luftwaffe veterans. Yet their determination, honed by weeks of combat over the Channel and London, allowed them to hold their ground. Accounts from the day tell of pilots pressing attacks even when low on ammunition, returning to base with bullet-riddled aircraft, or diving through flak-filled skies to protect comrades. Each engagement carried the weight of not only their own lives, but the survival of the nation below. The Luftwaffe, despite its superior numbers, suffered severe losses. German bombers were shot down at alarming rates, and fighter escorts were often unable to fully shield them. Some formations were scattered, their cohesion broken by the RAF's relentless defense. Pilots who had expected to intimidate and overwhelm found themselves retreating under the pressure of skillful, determined opposition. By the end of the day, the scale of German losses was stark, and their strategy of terror had failed to achieve its intended effect. Behind the aerial battles, coordination between pilots and ground control proved decisive. Radar stations along the coast had provided early warning, allowing squadrons to intercept enemy formations before they reached critical targets. Plotting rooms managed multiple engagements simultaneously, ensuring that each squadron was directed to the most strategic position. This integration of technology, strategy, and human skill exemplified the innovation and adaptability that characterized fighter command. Civilians, meanwhile, witnessed both terror and triumph. From rooftops, shelters, and windows, Londoners saw flashes of dogfights, explosions, and Spitfires streaking across the sky. Though the city had endured weeks of bombing, 15th of September offered a moment of hope. News spread quickly of the RAF's success, lifting morale and reinforcing the belief that Britain could withstand the German assault. The bravery of a few pilots became a symbol of the resilience of an entire nation. The day also highlighted the importance of individual skill within a broader strategy. Pilots such as Squadron Leader Douglas Bader and Flight Lieutenant Johnny Johnson, among others, executed maneuvers that combined instinct, training, and daring. They exemplified how a single pilot in the right position could disrupt an enemy formation, protect fellow airmen, and change the outcome of an engagement. The stories of heroism, often repeated in letters and memoirs, underscored the profound human element in the battle for the skies. By evening, it was clear that the Luftwaffe had suffered a significant setback. The scale of aircraft losses, combined with the inability to achieve strategic objectives, forced German command to reconsider their tactics. The shift from targeting airfields to bombing cities had failed to break fighter command or civilian morale. Britain's air defenses had endured, and in doing so had preserved the possibility of preventing invasion. The significance of 15th September extended beyond the immediate military outcome. It marked the moment when the balance of the Battle of Britain began to shift decisively in favor of the RAF. Pilots, aircraft, ground crews, and civilians had all contributed to a victory that was both symbolic and strategic. The courage, skill, and determination displayed that day would be remembered for generations, forming the foundation of the legend of the few. In the aftermath, pilots returned to their airfields exhausted but triumphant. Mechanics and ground crews had ensured that the aircraft were ready to fly again at a moment's notice, repairing damage sustained during the intense engagements. Reports and debriefings highlighted not only the tactical lessons learned, but also the human endurance and spirit that had carried the day. Victory had not come without cost. Lives had been lost and aircraft destroyed, but the resilience of the defenders had proven unbreakable. This turning point also reinforced the strategic importance of Spitfires in the broader conflict. Their combination of speed, maneuverability, and firepower had allowed RAF pilots to match and exceed the capabilities of their German counterparts in critical engagements. Hurricanes, while less agile, complemented the Spitfires with their ability to absorb damage and deliver sustained attacks on bombers. Together, these aircraft represented not only technological innovation, but the lifeblood of Britain's defense. The legacy of 15th September extended beyond the tactical victory. It became a symbol of national resilience, the embodiment of courage under pressure, and a rallying point for both the military and civilian populations. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and eyewitness accounts celebrated the bravery of the pilots while acknowledging the sacrifices made. It was a moment that galvanized the nation and reassured allies around the world that Britain was not a passive target, but a determined and capable defender. In essence, 15th September 1940 was more than a single day of combat. It was the affirmation of a strategy, the proof of technological and human ingenuity, and the defining moment when the tide of the Battle of Britain began to turn. From the skies over southern England, the men in their Spitfires and Hurricanes had achieved something remarkable. They had demonstrated that courage, skill, and coordination could overcome even overwhelming odds. The stage was now set for the final phase of the battle and the broader conflict that would shape the course of the Second World War. Britain had survived the test, and in doing so had shown the world the extraordinary lengths to which a small island nation could go to defend its freedom. The legends of the few were solidified that day, immortalized in the skies and in the hearts of those who had witnessed their heroism. With the Luftwaffe repelled and the Battle of Britain turning in favor of the Royal Air Force, Britain entered a period of both relief and reflection. The skies that had once been filled with the roar of engines, the flash of tracer fire, and the smoke of burning aircraft were beginning to clear, leaving a nation to reckon with what had been achieved and what had been lost. The victory was not just military, it was symbolic, a testament to courage, ingenuity, and the indomitable spirit of those who had defended the island. The men who had flown Spitfires and Hurricanes, often barely out of their teens, returned to airfields exhausted but resolute. Their actions over the Channel, across southern England, and above London had saved the nation from invasion. They were, Winston Churchill famously declared, the few, a small determined group whose bravery had altered the course of history. The phrase captured the imagination of the public, and their exploits became legendary, recounted in newspapers, memoirs, and later, films. Spitfires themselves became more than just machines of war. They symbolized freedom, resilience, and technological ingenuity. Every polished fuselage, every elliptical wing, every Merlin engine roaring into the sky represented the fusion of human skill and engineering brilliance. Pilots developed a bond with these aircraft that went beyond mechanics. The Spitfire became an extension of themselves, capable of extraordinary maneuvers and daring feats that could tip the scales in a battle. Hurricanes, too, earned their place in history, valued for their reliability and heavy armament that could bring down the formidable German bombers. Together, these aircraft embodied Britain's aerial defense. The legacy of the battle extended far beyond the pilots and aircraft. Ground crews, radar operators, and plotting officers had worked tirelessly to maintain the RAF's readiness. Their contributions, often overshadowed by the drama of dogfights, were essential. Mechanics repaired aircraft under impossible conditions, sometimes improvising with limited parts. Radar operators guided squadrons through the chaos of combat. Planners coordinated missions with a precision that turned strategy into action. Victory was a collective achievement, forged by the seamless collaboration of countless individuals. The battle also had a profound impact on British society. Civilians who had endured air raids, rationing, and the constant threat of death found in the pilots' courage a source of hope. Schools, factories, and neighborhoods became microcosms of resilience, where citizens contributed in ways both large and small. Children learned to recognize the shapes of Spitfires and Hurricanes in the sky. Adults volunteered for civil defense, fire brigades, and emergency services. A shared sense of purpose and national pride emerged, reinforcing the idea that the defense of Britain was a collective responsibility. In the years that followed, the influence of the Battle of Britain and the Spitfire extended beyond the immediate conflict. Surviving aircraft were modified, improved, and used in further campaigns, proving the adaptability and enduring value of their design. Pilots who had flown during the battle often continued in leadership roles, training new generations and passing on the hard-earned lessons of combat. Their experiences became a foundation for modern aerial tactics and strategic planning, influencing military doctrine long after the war. Memorials and museums now stand as enduring reminders of that pivotal summer. The Battle of Britain Memorial in Kent, the RAF Museum in London, and countless plaques and statues across the country commemorate the sacrifice and heroism of pilots, ground crews, and civilians alike. Restored Spitfires continue to fly in air shows around the world, a living connection to the past and a demonstration of both engineering excellence and historical significance. Watching these aircraft carve arcs across the sky, spectators are transported back to a time when courage, skill, and determination defined a generation. The symbolic power of the Spitfire and the pilots of the Battle of Britain transcends national boundaries. Volunteers from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and other nations contributed to the defense of Britain, forging an international legacy of cooperation and shared sacrifice. Their stories remind us that the defense of freedom is rarely confined to a single nation or group of people. It is the product of collaboration, courage, and a willingness to stand against overwhelming odds. The lessons of the Battle of Britain continue to resonate today. In military history, it exemplifies the importance of technology, coordination, and morale. The integration of radar, aircraft design, and human skill demonstrates how innovation and preparation can overcome numerical disadvantage. In human terms, it illustrates the extraordinary resilience of individuals under extreme pressure, the power of teamwork, and the enduring impact of courage in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Beyond the battlefield, the story of the few has become a cultural touchstone. Books, films, and documentaries retell the exploits of RAF pilots, grounding dramatic narratives in historical fact. The Spitfire, once a tool of war, now symbolizes hope, ingenuity, and the triumph of determination over adversity. Young people studying history, aviation enthusiasts, and casual observers alike are inspired by the story, proving that the legacy of the Battle of Britain is as much about ideas and values as it is about planes and pilots. In the quiet moments after the battle, when the skies were clear and the roar of engines faded, Britain began to rebuild. Airfields repaired, factories resumed production, and communities healed. Yet the memory of those intense months, of Spitfires streaking across the horizon, and of pilots risking everything to protect their homeland, remained vivid. It was a memory embedded not only in the collective consciousness of a nation, but in the very fabric of its identity. Ultimately, the legacy of victory in the Battle of Britain is a testament to what can be achieved when courage, skill, and determination are combined with innovation and teamwork. The Spitfire remains an enduring symbol of that achievement, and the pilots who flew them, the few, continue to inspire generations to confront challenges with bravery and resolve. The story of that summer in 1940 is more than a tale of military strategy. It is a narrative of human endurance, ingenuity, and the unyielding spirit that defines a nation in its hour of need. The skies that once roared with conflict now serve as a reminder that even in the darkest hours, courage and determination can prevail. Britain had survived, and in doing so had created a legacy that would endure for generations. Spitfires, Hurricanes, the men who flew them, and the civilians who supported them became eternal symbols of what is possible when ordinary people rise to meet extraordinary challenges. The Battle of Britain and the heroism of the few remains a timeless story, a story of flight, fire, and fortitude, a testament to the enduring power of courage in the defense of freedom.